From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. Families whose loved ones were killed in the Robb Elementary School shooting traveled to Austin this week advocating for legislation. We'll have more on that in just a minute, but first, let's get to the 3 things you need to know in Texas politics. 2022 was a record-breaking year for the Texas oil and gas industry. The Texas Oil and Gas Association released its annual report Monday, showing the industry paid $24.7 billion in taxes and state royalties in fiscal year 2022. The previous record, $16 billion back in 2019. Leaders of the organization say it's unlikely they will be able to replicate these numbers, but add there are things lawmakers can do to help the industry be successful, like ensure the electric grid is reliable and reduce property taxes. Austin State Representative James Tallarico filed a bill this week to give all Texas classroom teachers, librarians, counselors, and nurses a $15,000 raise. HB 1548 will give other school professionals a 25% raise. The raises would be paid for with the state's $32 billion budget surplus. Right now, Texas teacher salaries are roughly $7,500 less than the national average. Texas Democratic lawmakers stood together Wednesday to denounce Senate Bill 147. The proposal from Republican State Senator Lois Kolkhorst would ban green card holders, asylum seekers, and businesses from China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia from buying property in Texas. In a statement, Kolkhorst said the legislation is intended to address national security concerns, but opponents say denying a select group of people the opportunity to buy land because of where they were born is racist, plain and simple. Opponents plan to host a rally condemning the bill at the Capitol at 1 o'clock today. Tuesday marked 8 months since 19 children and their 2 teachers were brutally murdered at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Some of the victims' families traveled to the Capitol on that grim anniversary to bring attention to a slate of bills by their state senator, Roland Gutierrez. Senator Gutierrez joined me to talk about his bills. You have filed a number of bills in response to the Robb Elementary School shooting. This week, you talked about 4 of them really pushing for accountability. Let's start with Senate Bill 575 and Senate Concurrent Resolution 12, which would end qualified immunity for police officers. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's time. Look, we all respect cops. We all respect our police departments. But at the end of the day, it's probably the one profession you can't sue in a very effective way. And when there is negligence, you ought to be able to sue a law enforcement agency. We're seeing, things across the United States like what we saw in Memphis. So whether it's, a violence from a cop to a civilian, or whether it's the kind of negligence we saw in Uvalde, where for 77 minutes, not one of these cops from any state agency did anything to help those children that were just feet away. We've got to be able to allow people access to justice, access to the courthouse, and let the courts handle whether someone is entitled to a protection or not. We can't just say, look, you can sue the lawyer, you can sue the doctor, you can sue your teacher, but you can't sue a cop. Doesn't make sense.
This, though, is not the first time lawmakers have tried to pass legislation similar to this. Members of the Legislative Black Caucus tried to end immunity for officers back in 2021 in response to the death of George Floyd. It failed then. Do you think there's more of an appetite for this type of legislation this session?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what I've asked for is also another concurrent resolution to try to get permission for these families to sue the state in this one instance. And hopefully we can pass that. We do that on occasion from time to time, which is we give permission and waive sovereign immunity. Again, I think that everybody out there listening respects law enforcement, but under no certain circumstances should we respect the kind of law enforcement that leaves kids to die for 77 minutes. Should we expect law enforcement that intentionally beats on people? It's not right. We see officer-involved shootings with people that are unarmed across this country. You see incidences like George Floyd. We have to have accountability in every profession. How is it that I, as a lawyer, can sue just about every profession except for the police? It just doesn't make sense.
You're also proposing a victims' compensation fund. Talk to us about that legislation.
During the summer, we filed a victims compensation fund that was more based on the negligence that we had in this community. If my Republican colleagues don't want to talk about that negligence through any kind of legislation, we offered more of a general victims compensation fund for anybody that would have lost their child in a school. Retroactive to 5 years to cover the Santa Fe shooting as well. At the end of the day, if people entrust the state of Texas with their children for 8 hours a day, if something happens to your child at school and your child doesn't come home, like these poor families in Uvalde, imagine that. They sent off their children to school and they never came home again. Then the state of Texas should compensate you. The state of Texas should compensate you if they're injured, if they're physically injured, if they're mentally injured, and certainly if they pass on. And that's what this bill seeks to do.
You filed some other legislation and say you will file more, a total of 20 bills in response to the shooting. I think most notably are some of your proposals on guns, raising the age, banning some types of firearms. Talk to us about some of those bills.
Yeah, so we've raised the age limit, or at least we're asking to raise the age limit to 21. Most Republican voters agree with us on that one. Under no circumstances should you be able to buy a long gun, an AR-15, like these people were able to do, like this kid was able to do. And so we're asking for that. We're asking for extreme risk protective orders. We're asking for background checks. The things that make most sense that people on both sides of the aisle want, everybody but the Republican caucus in the Senate and the House. And so we need to address this. We need to have constituents call them and say, let's have common sense gun solutions. Look, I'm a gun owner. I get it. I represent South and West Texas. My constituents want common sense solutions. They don't want their guns taken away. I understand that. We're just asking for common sense gun safety. Over the course of the next several weeks, we will be filing 21 bills by the time we're done that are in reference to Uvalde.
Yeah. Have you been able to talk with the Lieutenant Governor about some of these gun-specific proposals?
The Lieutenant Governor and I have had discussions in the past. We continue to have discussions. He's a pragmatic person. I think that he's going to look at what's on the ground. I think that he's going to look at the polling. I think he's going to look at what Republican constituents could live with, and hopefully do something right for the people of Texas. It's my expectation, or at least my hope, that the Texas Senate can put forth something that's responsible, something that's right and just, not just for these families in Uvalde, but for Texans all over Texas, so that they understand that their kids are safer in our schools. We've got a lot of work to do, and we don't have that much time to do it in. So the next several weeks are important, and we will continue to have dialogues with the Lieutenant Governor and others.
When you talked about this bill, or these bills, earlier this week, you were surrounded by parents and loved ones of some of the victims. You invited them to talk about all that they've lost and the need for action that they see. I want you to talk to us about what it means personally to you to be able to give them a voice, give them this platform at the Capitol.
These people are my friends, and they've become my friends in all of this. I finally signed the non-disclosure agreement with the Department of Public Safety, and I've seen hours and hours of body cam footage, and I've seen children with their faces just shot off. I've seen bodies of children just piled on top of one another. I've seen a teacher draped over several children trying to protect them, and her and all those little babies who were dead. I've seen things that I had never wanted to see in my life, and I can't stop seeing them every night. I don't want this to happen to anybody in Texas again. And so those families are just incredible people, and they're incredibly strong. And they don't want this to happen to anybody. And they certainly don't want to have their children's death be in vain. And so they're going to advocate. They're going to keep advocating it. And they're doing it on their own. I love them for it, and I pray for them every night.
Senator Gutierrez plans to hold news conferences for the rest of the session highlighting his bills. In fact, he'll have another one this week. That's Texas This Week.